Welcome to the Plant Spirit Podcast on connecting with plant consciousness and the healing wisdom of nature. I'm your host, Sara Artemisia, and I am deeply honored to welcome our next guest to the show today. John Seed is an environmental activist and founder of the Rainforest Information Centre. He's an accomplished bard, songwriter, filmmaker, and co-author of Thinking Like a Mountain, Towards a Council of All Beings. He has written and lectured extensively on deep ecology, and he's conducted deep ecology workshops around the world for 35 years to help people strengthen the felt sense of our connection with the living earth. So, John, thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor to have you here with us today.
Thanks so much, Sara.
I love how your approach is rooted in such a deep sense of connection and relationship with the earth. And I'd love to hear, to start today, how do you really feel that spirituality and ecology are one and the same?
Well, it seems to me that everything grew out of the earth. I mean, the earth grew out of the universe, of course, but for the moment, let's just start with the earth. And one of the people I admire, whose work I admire, is the cosmologist Brian Swim. And he once said, "The earth used to be nothing but lava, and now it sings opera." And so it's just this sense that I have that everything grew out of that lava, that nothing has been added since then. Nothing came from the outside in order to turn the lava into all of this. And that includes, of course, spirituality. So to deep ecology, human beings are not the crown of creation or the top of any pyramid, but we're just one tiny leaf on the tree of life, and everything about us comes from that tree, that there is nothing about us that doesn't come from the earth. And so that, of course, includes spirituality.
Amazing. And so succinct. I love that. And I also, just before we move forward, want to just say to everyone listening that a little bit later, John will be sharing a practice of connection with a plant. And so if you have a moment right now to either pause and go sit with a plant or just find one in your space, that would be really helpful. And if not, of course, you can always come back to the exercise later. So I just wanted to share that here. And so I know that you've been working for decades with protecting rainforests, and I was curious if you could share some stories that you've had about that.
Well, perhaps I'll start with the story that I was telling you a little bit of before we hit record. And that was how I got into this in the first place, where in August of 1979, I went down to the local hippie market where, people had their crafts and food for sale. And one of the neighbours got up on the stage and asked for help because he said the Forestry Commission was coming in the next day to log the rainforest at the end of Terania Creek Road. And I'd never been to the end of Terania Creek Road. I didn't know what a rainforest was. I didn't know there were rainforests in Australia, but I was into helping the neighbours. And so innocently enough, I showed up the next day and was stunned to discover this magnificence that I had never imagined. And it appeared to be sentient, and it appeared to know me. And this time it was not my neighbour, but the forest itself that was asking for my help. And I was deeply disturbed because at that time I was living in a community of Buddhists, organising meditation retreats and growing our own food, delivering our own babies, etc. And there was nothing about my sort of cognitive framework that had prepared me for this. I didn't really believe in things like this. It sounded too woo-woo. But it was undeniable, and it was so warm and so authentic that soon enough I just surrendered and um, ran away with that circus, and have been, hanging on, you know, wherever it led me. I've been following ever since.
And how did you specifically find your way into deep ecology? Was that just a natural evolution from that first experience with the rainforest?
In some ways it was, but the way it actually happened was that those first actions in Australia were incredibly successful. It's hard to even imagine today that such a thing was possible, but our passion was easily able to communicate itself, because at that time this turned out to have been the first such direct action in defence of forests in the world, as far as we know. And um, that meant that the society had yet to develop any antibodies against the kind of theatrical expressions of people climbing into the trees and chaining themselves to the machinery, so that it was easy to be the first item on the news night after night. And clearly the time was ripe, because at the beginning, nobody knew that there was rainforest in Australia, really. But less than 2 years later, an opinion poll found that more than 70% of the people of our state of New South Wales wanted an end to rainforest logging, and the government of the day legislated with a string of national parks that stretched more than 500 miles from north to south. And the following year, we went from our subtropical rainforests down to the island state of Tasmania in the south of Australia, and had similar successes in protecting the temperate rainforests there. And 2 years later, we were up in far north Queensland, and once again, for the tropical rainforests, national parks and eventual World Heritage listing rewarded our efforts. But by now it was 1986, and we couldn't help but get a bit of an education, and had learned that these rainforests are the very womb of life. They're home to more than half of the species of plants and animals in the world, and the satellite photographs were showing them disappearing at a horrendous rate. Less than a single human lifetime remained at those rates of destruction. So clearly we were witnessing a mass extinction such as the world had not known for at least 65 million years. And for every forest that had been saved in the first half of the 1980s, 1,000 forests had been lost. And clearly there was no way to save the planet one forest at a time, that unless we could address the underlying spiritual or psychological disease that allows modern humans to imagine that we can somehow profit from the destruction of our own life support systems, clearly these actions weren't going to be sufficient. So my attention turned to trying to understand this this aspect of our dilemma, and that's what led me to deep ecology.
Yeah, so important. And it is wild how the system is set up like that. And you were sharing earlier this quote about the need to return to an ecological identity and ecological self, and that seems so pivotal for the time that we're in. I'm curious, because you have witnessed so much over the decades, and you were talking about how the time was really ripe at that time for the work you were doing at that time. What do you feel that the time is ripe for right now? Because there's so much happening globally. It really feels to me like we're in this pivotal time of change, this pivotal time of shifting planetarily. I'm curious, what do you see happening in that?
Oh, well, I guess I'm as confused as everybody else at recent events, and but from where I'm standing, what I've noticed is that the interest in the experiential deep ecology workshops, which I've been facilitating since I met Joanna Macy a couple of years after discovering the philosophy of deep ecology, I the man who coined the term deep ecology, the late Arnie Ness, professor of philosophy at Oslo University, who said that ecological ideas won't save us, we need ecological identity, ecological self. He proposed that in order to nourish our ecological identity, what was needed were community therapies to heal our relations with the living earth. And it was through meeting Joanna Macy that we began to develop such community therapies. And so you'll have to get me back on track.
I mean, to me, that sounds like it answers the question really directly. Like, what is the time ripe for? The time is ripe for community therapies to heal our relationship with the living earth, that this really is very key. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier as well is that very experiential connection with the earth, how that is so important. And so I was curious if you could share with us some practices, or I know you had shared about this practice, the breathing with trees. Is that something you'd be open to sharing about now?
And I would, but I'll just get that in terms of what the time is ripe for now. The reason that I brought up the experiential workshops is that I'm doing the same workshops that I developed with Joanna more than 30 years ago, but suddenly there's a huge surge of interest in this work that gives me a feeling that more and more people are ready to be listening to this, and so I just feel like that this is really hopeful. So the practice that I'd like to do, I'm going to do a longish introduction, and during that time, I'd like listeners to see whether they can either place themselves before a living plant, anything that's got anything green about it. A blade of grass is enough, or open a window so that there's line of sight to something green, which will become clear in a few minutes. So one of the processes that I did in the workshop that I did in Melbourne last weekend, and that is part of every workshop I do at the moment, on Saturday night we do a process called the Cosmic Walk. And this is a process that owes its existence to the late Thomas Berry. He was a famous theologian at the end of the last century, and late in his life he discovered that he had become a geologian, that his attention turned from the conception of God that he'd had all of his life from the Old Testament and the New Testament to the earth itself as the source of every story, including the stories that Christians tell, and that the Christian creation myth was one of 10,000 such myths that humans seem to require. It's ubiquitous, asking these questions about who are we and where did we come from. And all of the answers, Thomas said, are gorgeous, beautiful flowers of humanity on the earth, but they tend to be at war with each other. It's not just that the Christian story is at war with the Islam story, but that the Catholic story is at war with the Protestant, and the Sunni story is at war with the Shia, and that it's too late for that now. And we need to find a story that will unite us rather than separate us. And he proposed that the story revealed by empiricism, revealed by observation, revealed by our telescopes and microscopes, correctly told, was the creation myth of the future, was the creation myth that would unite all of us. And so the Cosmic Walk was a process created by one of his students. Sister Miriam Therese McGillis is a Catholic nun from Genesis Farm in New Jersey. And the Cosmic Walk, we have a ball of hemp 50 metres long, representing the 13.7 billion year epic story of the universe. And there are 23 beads appropriately placed on this 50 metres, each of which represents an important story in the emerging universe. And in the centre, there's a bead representing the amazing fact that anything exists at all, that had the fundamental forces of physics been 1/1,000,000% different than what they are, nothing would exist. But here we are. And so we place a tea light candle next to each of these beads. They're hemp is laid out in a spiral, and while singing a chant called Child of the Universe, I am as old as the universe. I've been here before and I'll be here again. I am a child of the universe, part of all women, part of all men. The youngest person in the group lights the candle in the centre. We tell the story of existence, and then she or he lights a taper, and while we chant, walks around lighting candle after candle as the story of the emerging universe is told. And we get about 2/3 of the way around, and we light a candle to represent the supernova explosion and the debris of which created our sun and all of the planets of our solar system, and so on. So the process that I'm going to introduce in a moment starts about between 2 and 3 billion years ago, when our ancestors were single-celled bacteria floating in the oceans, and we had become incredibly successful and proliferated to the extent that we'd used up all of the freely available nutrients in the ocean, and there was a crisis of starvation. And that crisis was solved by the emergence of a new molecule, chlorophyll, which allowed these bacteria to capture photons of light from the sun and use the energy of that to be able to extract carbon from CO2 to continue to build our bodies. And this was a tremendous innovation that solved the problem of how to continue at that point, but it had the side effect of every time one of these transactions took place, a molecule of oxygen was released, and oxygen was a toxic poison to the anaerobic life of that time. For nearly 1 billion years, that oxygen couldn't accumulate because there was so much iron dissolved in the ocean coming up from lava that the moment some oxygen was released, it oxidized some iron, and a molecule of rust fell to the ocean floor. And all of the iron that we mine today to build our cities and our motor cars and our aeroplanes, it's now understood that that's how it accumulated. That's how all of that, those great, blocks of iron that we mine were accumulated one molecule at a time by these ancestors breaking CO2 up and releasing oxygen. But eventually, about 2 billion years ago, all of the iron had been swept out of the oceans and oxygen began to accumulate, threatening all of life. And this problem was solved by another of the bacteria of that time, which created a new molecule, which was the heme molecule, the ancestor of the hemoglobin protein that transports oxygen through all animal bodies, including our own. And this ancient cycle of partnership between the producers of chlorophyll and the producers of heme has continued since that time, and we reenact that in every breath we take. So the particular process that I'm going to invite people to share with us at the moment is I'm going to be looking out my window at some green trees outside the window, and I invite people to look at a plant and see what happens when we add consciousness to this ancient cycle of partnership. Because I believe that this is one of the processes that helps us to understand and embody our ecological identity. Usually we're trapped in our social identity, our nationality or our religion or these social constructs, but this is something that takes us back billions and billions of years into our history, and when we add consciousness to it, let's see what happens. So looking out at this green thing, the blade of grass or a tree, with we're just going to do this for a few minutes. With each in-breath, remember the gift that's being received, the oxygen that we need in order to be alive is being produced by these green things, and so we allow ourselves to feel gratitude for this gift. And with each out-breath, remembering that those green things mutually depend upon our exhalations as well. And so we can feel, instead of just being ashamed of the CO2 that we're producing, we can feel a sense of abundance and generosity because in the correct quantities, this CO2 is just as essential for the life of these plants as the oxygen is for our life. And so each inhalation and exhalation becomes an exchange of gifts, and we connect with the world in this way. So it's like a breath meditation, but it's actually about the exchange of gases itself. So just exchanging gases with the green world for a couple of minutes, and I'll shut up. Thank you. Of course, I invite you to continue this for a bit longer after the podcast.
Well, thanks so much, John. So wonderful. And I mean, really, in what you shared there about how the inhalation and the exhalation, it becomes this exchange of gifts, how, so often there can be this experience in my perception of the human experience in connecting with plants where it's more of like through the eyes, as if it's like, oh, they're over there and I'm over here in my human experience, and how the breath transcends that directly. It's just right into the body of like, we are in relationship through the very act of breathing, and how simple and profound that is. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So great. And also on that note, just recognizing the pivotal times that we're in, why is it important for deep ecology to move more into the mainstream?
Well, deep ecology, the experience of deep ecology, which Joanna Macy calls the work that reconnects us both to the living earth, to the natural world, to the rest of nature. It dispels the illusion of separation. And that means that we feel ever more motivation to engage with protecting wild nature. But it also reconnects us. Arnie Ness called for community therapies. This isn't something that's done individually. It's done in a circle with other people. And what we find is that when we get together with a circle of people and we have the shared intention to heal our relations with the more than human world, a tremendous bonding develops between the people who do that together. And I heard of a really interesting study a couple of weeks ago, which I loved, that someone posed a difficult problem to a large number of people as individuals, and about 10% of the people were able to solve that problem. But the same problem given to a small group of individuals, 80% of the groups solved the problem, because we're social mammals and we evolved to work together to solve the problems that we face. That no matter how fit an individual is, unless they live in a community that's fit, no amount of personal fitness will allow us to survive and to move forward. And so finding a circle of people with whom we share that intention to heal our relations with the earth and to protect the earth, it's just a tremendously powerful force that I think is going to move us forward.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I'm curious for folks who may be listening right now who feel a bit isolated. Maybe they're living in a community where they feel like they don't have that kind of resonance. Do you have any suggestions for how folks could connect with others to really deepen in this way?
Well, I mean, the first thing is just to look up the work that reconnects and deep ecology, a nature connection, rewilding, words like this, and see, with your address and see, like what's around, because there are thousands of groups around the world that are already offering this. But the other thing is that what we found is that because in these workshops, it's the intention that does all of the heavy lifting, that once a group of people share that intention together, you don't need like a highly skilled facilitator or anything like that. And when Joanna Macy and I joined Professor Arnie Ness and Pat Fleming, and we wrote our book, Thinking Like a Mountain Towards the Council of All Beings in 1988, and a PDF of that. There'll be a link in the show notes so that people can find that book. We wrote it like a recipe book, where just like a recipe, you don't have to go to cooking school or anything like that. You can just look at the recipe and follow the recipe, and that's it. So many people have just, so basically all that you need to do, if there's nothing else in your neighbourhood, is to put out a call for like-minded people and get together with 3 or 4 people and then follow the recipe, because it works. And that becomes the focal point that will attract more people. And it's these small circles growing in number that I think is where the hope lies.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And tell us, how can people find out more about you and your work?
Oh, well, if you put, John C. Deep Ecology into a search engine, all my social media and other, websites and things like that will be there.
Well, thanks so much, John. And yeah, so wonderful to connect today. And just thank you so much for your life's work and for honoring that call and for being so deeply engaged in relationship with the earth. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Sara.